Welcome to this webinar looking at how to adapt to the changing landscape of B2B payments. If you're a certified member of IFOL, this webinar will provide you with 2 continuous learning credits. I'm Sue Beardsmore, and with me is an expert panel to look at where things are and where they may be going, looking at businesses, the benefits of digital B2B payments for businesses of whatever size, in whatever sector, and answering some of the most common questions that we know you have. Each member of our panel is an expert in the field of automation, and they've helped businesses of all sizes and in a really wide range of industries reach peak performance. They'll be discussing best practice in payment solutions, the benefits of improved payment and performance data, and digital strategies that make a difference to the bottom line. If you have any questions as we go through, please put them in the chat and we'll put them to the panel, maybe pick up some of them at the end. Let's meet our panel. Maggie Schroeder is a Senior Solutions Consultant for Corpay. Maggie, perhaps you'd introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Maggie Schroeder, and I'm a Senior Solutions Consultant for Corpay. A little bit about my background. I'm a CPA. I've worked in audit for Deloitte. I've also worked as a consultant helping businesses identify issues and decide on accounts payable software. I've also worked in implementation, helping bring clients in on and implement AP automation programs. So thank you for having me.
Good to have you with us. Dan Reeve is Director of Sales for ESCA. Dan, tell us a bit about you and ESCA.
Sure, the accent is English. Sometimes folks accuse me of being Australian. Live in the US, been here 16 years and been with ESCA 23. So when folks ask what we do here, I like to say our mission is to help finance leaders, supply chain leaders, and shared service leaders to free up their staff to go and be rock stars. What does that mean? I mean, it's technology to free folks up to go and do more valuable work with the supplier or the customer. And increasingly, I see companies are trying to compete, not just with how they treat the customer, but compete through building better relationships and servicing the suppliers better too.
Thanks a lot, Dan. And Matthew Mellon, Matt Mellon, Director Account Management for MasterCard. Matthew, tell us a bit about your experience and MasterCard's experience.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. So yes, Matthew Mellon, I'm with MasterCard, and I'm the account manager focused on our commercial payments business. I've been with MasterCard a little over 16 years, joining the firm from a Midwest regional issuer where I launched a corporate card program, everything from implementation to sales to customer support. So I'm here today with MasterCard to help talk through this webinar.
Thanks very much indeed. Now, to give us a quick idea of what's going on with you out there, we'd like to kick off with a quick poll. And we're asking, what percentage of payments in your business currently are electronic? So just click on 0 to 20%, 20 to 40%, 40 to 60%, 60 to 80%, or 80 to 100%. And although it's very clear in front of you there, I shall just whiz through that again, make sure everybody's clicked. 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, 80 to 100. And it's shifted around a little, but I think we can see that a lot of people watching and joining us today are out there on the 0 to 20 category. So the lower end of the spectrum, which is a reasonable place to start our discussions. So thank you for that. So let's kick off. The pandemics have affected so many parts of our lives, personal and professional, and the need for remote working has had a huge impact on the rate of change in digitalization and the move to electronic payments in business. We can see there what's going on with you, and thank you for that. But let's see what the perspective from the panel is. Matt, is that what you would have expected from what you're seeing? Give us the overview from you.
Yeah, that's in line with what I was expecting. It'd be interesting to see where that was pre-pandemic, right? To see where those payments had shifted to electronic. I think, living through this, we all understood that you had to be flexible and you'd be agile, and no matter what business that you were in. Your goals were, one, to make sure your employees were safe. You wanted business continuity. You wanted to make sure you meet your business objectives, what your business processes were, and what your technology you had to support that throughout it. Looking at financial payments, everything from salaries to bills, government benefits, loan applications, you see that the financial transactions are really the backbone to make sure you're meeting the objectives as you went through the pandemic. We were clear to see that a lot of the payments that were coming through in the commercial card realm. So we did see an uptick in that. And those payment methods, we looked at creative solutions to make sure that the supply chain didn't end. And you see that a lot. And I think we'll talk about those today. Specifically, digital transformation and the next generation data platforms. Looking for data within the industry and even some of the polling that we had just done, we see that virtual card payments in the commercial realm definitely stood out as a way of payment. We're seeing those to really make a big spike next year in 2022. We look at those from a few things, is the way they can accelerate and accommodate financial transactions, as well as they look from a secure form of payment as really a token that is hitting those objectives. So that's where I kind of see where we start. Love to hear what the panel says.
Okay, Maggie, perhaps we could come to you. What's been your experience of what you're seeing with businesses over the past 18 months or so?
Yeah, so first I'll comment on something that Matt said. So we have seen an uptick in electronic payments, but with that, we've seen businesses come to us at Corpay looking for solutions with accounts payable automation and actual payment automation. So half the battle is getting your suppliers, getting your vendors to accept and take electronic payments and moving to that, setting up some kind of process around your ACH, your card payments. But that's a big process and that's a big lift, especially if you're not partnering with someone who's, helping you achieve those goals. So we did see a lot of clients come to us that during the pandemic, they really pushed to get vendors on electronic payment. But the piece that was missing was how to streamline that process where it wasn't piecing together an ACH notcha file here, a card file here, things of that nature. So really kind of finalizing and bringing that all together to make it easier.
Okay, so at the moment, people were just doing what they had to do. Dan, what was your experience?
Exactly.
What did you see?
So our experience was that there was about a 6 weeks pause. A lot of folks paused on projects because they were a bit unsure about how we deploy projects with everybody being remote. Then what happened, I think, is COVID was the chief innovation officer for many, and certainly in our world, it was like somebody poured gasoline on the fire, and we just became. We haven't looked back. And what I've seen is a lot of CFOs, CIOs, shared service leaders looked at their processes and said, people don't want to come in the office. The process is broken. We're missing payments. Or CFOs, I think, fundamentally said to their organization, look, how do we improve cash flow? Be it earning early payment discounts, making sure we treat our suppliers well. We're going to need them, especially during these supply chain shortages that we're seeing. And also, how do we have solutions that help us both take care of the supply, but also help with order to cash, because cash is king. So how do we deliver invoices, collect the money, apply the cash, and work both angles? And I think the other thing we saw is that these CFOs and shared service leaders were saying, we had technology, we see gaps. Now there's an opportunity to both improve cash flow overall. And most folks that I speak to Maggie's point, are realizing there's a way to pay for this technology and this innovation. They may have had some things in place that were piecemeal. Now they realize, I think many are saying, okay, I'm looking for both somebody that can pay the supplier, give us visibility and control, help us maybe acquire new companies and absorb that traffic. But then can we take rebates and pay for that? So it's a busy time basically because of all that.
Okay, so as a world, as people, we're all getting much more used to electronic payments, and that's why business partly needs it, because people want it. But could we just briefly look at some of the changes that people made under duress? They had to make them in a hurry. Are those changes going to be sticking with us, or do they need refining? Perhaps Matt, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, within, the market and research and white papers that are coming out, is that balance of the benefits to the buyers and the suppliers are really driving value and really paying for itself. And I think that is going to continue. I do not think there's going to be a shift backwards. I do like the innovation that is in place today. And I think the buyers and the suppliers are seeing the value. So we're going to see this trend continue.
Okay, Maggie?
Yeah, so a lot of things that I heard from prospects and from clients were that there were a lot of processes that have been in place for years that no one really thought had any issues. They went on about daily business when they were in the office, things like leaving checks on someone's desk until they got around to signing them, or printing out an Excel file or invoices and leaving copies on, for people to review. Things that had just gone on really without what they thought as issues up until the pandemic hit and we had to go remote. But what happened because of that is a lot of companies were like, okay, we've now identified we had, that was blaringly obvious that these were not working. So now we have to identify them. And now that we've identified them and we've already started the process of automating that, bringing in technology, why would we ever go back? So I think we're going to see that those things, those processes, and that is going to continue to evolve and continue to move forward in the direction of automation versus going back into, more manual, more paper processes, just because, once progress starts, it's hard to stop it. So I think we're definitely going to see that be a continuation.
Thanks, Maggie. Dan, you talked a little bit about, piecemeal, people had to do things. Do you think there were any fundamental errors, or it's really just getting a smoother approach now that they've seen the direction that they need to go in?
I have to go back to what Maggie was saying and build upon what Maggie was saying, I think, because I think a couple of things are happening now. One, we're seeing a lot of change from an HR point of view. Many folks reevaluate the type of work they wanted to do post-pandemic. And so I see many organizations aren't putting technology in just for efficiency, so clearly that's typically one of the main drivers. They're also looking at, okay, if I've got payables or procurement staff, I want to put tools in that they will use, they'll appreciate, and try and free them up to enjoy their work more. I don't think that trend, and that's important if you want to retain your staff and see them grow within the organization. I think the other thing that's going to continue is supplier risk. So bad actors, we probably all received an email from a fraudster during that period, or read about somebody that was affected by fraud. I don't think that's backing away. And also what we saw is with the need for many buying organizations to have more suppliers because they needed more options to get product to their, or goods and services to their customers. There's more of a need to push customers and suppliers through a process where they're vetted to make sure that you're not bringing on a bad actor. I think, and the other thing what we've seen is many organizations now in their contracts are requiring electronic payment, and they're saying we won't deal with paper anymore. So I think you add all that up, and there's just this seismic shift that's going to continue. And I think Maggie hit it on the head, really.
Thanks very much. Well, before we talk about, the things that really are options now, the evolution of what's going on and the benefits in more specific detail, we're just going to run a quick poll and ask the people with us, what are your main considerations when analysing a payment solution? So cost, ease of use, fraud prevention ability, compliance, security, or scalability. So what are the things that matter to you most? Cost, ease of use, fraud prevention ability, compliance, security, or scalability. And as there's a little bit more to think about here, we'll give you a few seconds to perhaps vote in it. Most important to you.
I bet many of the panelists are wishing there was a D, all of the above.
Well, I'm sure some people are probably, going down the list, Maggie. I'm sure that's right.
Check.
And we'll pick those apart in a moment, because I'm sure that's what people want to hear from you guys about what the options are and how they can address all these things. Yes, Adrian, all of the above, right? We'll get through them hopefully with the panel. Okay, so a good list there. I suspect because a little bit of what we've been talking about, the fraud prevention ability comes out marginally ahead, but let's go on to talk about the best practice in payment solutions. What's on offer now. So Dan, perhaps you could take us through some from your perspective, a little bit more detail on what you've been mentioning already.
Well, I think what I'm hearing from CFOs, shared service leaders, controllers, etc., is that they realize there's the opportunity, if they, to use an English term, should I say, a British Army term, if you can get the invoice sped around the organization at a speed of 1,000 gazelles, then great. There's more appetite. The supplier is more likely to be interested in accepting electronic payments and etc. So we've certainly seen an increasing interest where folks are saying, okay, even if we had a payable solution, now we're interested in doing more with that. But increasingly, we're seeing folks sort of saying, right, we're not necessarily getting all the efficiency. We haven't necessarily got AI built into what we had. We realized we could probably go further and maybe go upstream and have a little bit of procurement. Can it also give us some of those capabilities to begin paying electronically and earn some rebates? So we're seeing a lot of interest in that in particular on this end.
Maggie, what do you think that the options that are evolving are available to people now to address some of those things, all of the above?
Yeah, I think I've worked in banking industry, I've worked now for Corpay, and I see that the need for something that addresses all of those things is definitely there, but especially the fraud situation. I see our clients are coming to us asking for how we handle data storage, SOC 2 compliance, things of that nature. That's really been like a key thing. So I think as companies start to pop up that are doing these types of things, that's a big thing to ask is like, what is your indemnification around payments? What's the fraud? What's the security? So that's becoming more and more important. Whereas I think, maybe 5-6 years ago, it was like, okay, how do you handle ACH? Like, what's your conversion of card? Now that's still important. People want rebate. They still want to know what our conversion rates is for campaigns, but we're getting a lot more questions around security than we were probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Sue, if I can add to that, I actually have a CFO, a joint customer between Esco and Corpay. And it was interesting because that CFO said to me, Dan, surprisingly, he said, even though I shouldn't be surprised, the fraud component, being able to, when we make these electronic payments, having the two systems that can talk to one another, Esco and Corpay, and he said, I underestimated just how much value is involved in Corpay taking control and responsibility for that whole payment process. And he said, during this period, we actually had somebody did steal our mail, tried to cash them.
Yeah.
He says, so that's really going on. And the fact that Corpay helped protect us there, he says, that's massive, Dan. And perhaps we didn't appreciate just how important that is, and it's going to continue to be important in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And I've also seen, yes, there are fraud attempts, and that's really important. You want to find someone who's going to help secure your funds against fraud, but there's also just mistakes. I've worked with clients who just accidentally wired money to the wrong people. They put in the account number incorrectly when they were doing their wire or their ACH file. It's very easy to do. I've seen clients wire the wrong amount to the person. And even though it wasn't fraud and you're not trying to, go after someone legally, it's still a really big pain to pull that money back and work with the vendor. And that's something, it's just time. And that's the other thing, is we saw people, they're trying to get a lot of this off of their team's plate because they're trying to do more with less people. And when you've got one of your employees that's having to spend days or weeks trying to claw back money from a vendor because they accidentally paid the wrong amount or something of that nature, it just takes a lot of time and energy that they don't have on their plate.
Matthew, do you think that there's been a big evolvement of what's on offer that perhaps people don't realize?
Yeah, I believe there is, because if you look at from our network perspective, as we know the buyers and we know the suppliers, and I think Dan said it best, is how do we look at a trusted database, if you will, of those that are in the supply chain, those that need to get paid, and those that are facilitating those payments, be it on whatever rail that they are doing, and how do you have a common connection between those, in a common data format with payment choice, payment preference, and then being able to monitor those for fraud. So I think it's really bringing the constituents in the network or in the payment flow together and standardizing that, where they're getting the information and then how they're facilitating those payments and being able to monitor them as well. And I think we're seeing that within the market.
I think we're looking there at one of the specific benefits that you've all mentioned, but in some of the top reasons that people give for perhaps not doing any more digitization, automation, is the disruption, the kind of piecing together different pieces of technology. What would you say about that? What is on offer now? Dan?
You know, it's interesting. I was sat with a supply chain director in Columbus, Ohio last week, and he said, it was interesting. He said, you know, we have to be careful because these right now, I mean, and they're in the building materials industry, and we're seeing in the US a massive boom post, I say post COVID, massive boom in building materials, and he was sort of painting this picture of you can't overwhelm the C-suite. You know, yes, there's this appetite for digital innovation, but don't try and do too much at once, because the reality is there's only so much folks can absorb in terms of change. But at the same time, what I see going on is many of the CFOs and C-levels folks see an opportunity in the market right now, which is, oh, we might make an acquisition. We may end up with 1 or 2 or 3 different ERPs, and the easier you can make that process, if you have technology, both payables, workflow automation, procurement automation, payment capability out of those multiple ERPs, that too is making the life easier for the C-suite. So, you know, what I said there may have been a bit confusing, because it almost sounds like I'm saying 2 different sides of the coin, but the reality is start small, start in an agile manner if you can, but I think also look for technologies that can, like, you know, certainly Esker and Corpay, I think, provide that type of capability, which is, can we go and make acquisitions, automate the back-end process across multiple ERPs, both paying the supplier, approving the spend, making the electronic spend. That's definitely a trend that's going on right now as well.
Maggie, do you have some examples that you can refer to?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you, Dan. So we've seen the same thing, companies coming to us that have acquired other businesses or they've grown, and with that comes new banking relations. Not all of those entities may be under the same bank. They may be not under the same ERP system. So bringing those all together can be really complicated, especially if you're trying to piecemeal maybe a banking solution with a check printer. You've now got all these different people that you're working with. It's almost like you, instead of being an accountant, you have to be a project manager or a vendor manager. And that's not really their job. And so bringing on someone like Corpay can help really be able to take all those different ERPs, all those different bank accounts, and consolidate that into one payment process and one workflow. So I think that's been really important as we do see a lot of businesses start to acquire or start to kind of merge and grow.
And would you say that this is relevant to any size of business? I mean, we said at the beginning that you've all got experience across different sorts of corporations, organizations. It doesn't matter what size business you are.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, it doesn't. I would say absolutely not, because if you look at, you know, to what Maggie highlighted, that is bringing, no matter what the business is or the size of it, bringing those operational efficiencies and bringing you know those to what a C-suite might look as a non-revenue generating activity within the organization. Bringing those operational efficiencies is highly valuable to the organization of any size.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in our world, I've seen companies as small as $36 million moving because the CFO, he or she, needed just visibility and financial controls, all the way through to multi-billion-dollar organizations. So I can't necessarily say that it's one sector of the market or in particular.
Okay, because presumably that's one of the things that does concern people when they're considering a wholesale move or a partial move, is return on investment. It's how much it's going to cost against how much it's not going to cost in the end. Perhaps you'd like to reflect on that. Maggie?
So if we're talking about initial investment into a potential solution, so I think you've got to think about, you've got to look at those long-term effects and what it's going to cost / what it's going to save you. So when you're talking about something that brings in like a card piece, that's a really easy thing to quantify, because you can look at a PAR analysis and you can see what your rebate's going to be. What's a little bit harder is looking at that cost efficiency or that workforce efficiency. So looking at what the cost of your labor is to process an invoice. There's ways of doing that. A lot of companies don't have that in an exact number. They may have an idea, but it's not exactly the easiest thing to quantify. So sometimes we do help customers dig into what their process is and kind of come up with what that number is at their current process. So that's something we can do. And as a solutions consultant working as more of a consultant for these prospects, that's kind of where my job comes into play, is helping identify what you may actually really be spending when you're not automating, and then what we can do and save when we bring in automation. So that's something to definitely consider and discuss with whatever solution you decide to work with.
Because presumably if people are using processes, still using partial processes that have been used for years and years and years, they're not really thinking about what that's actually costing and what they could save if they change the process. Right.
And the other thing is, when you're working in an accounts payable department or an accounting department in general, I mean, I've been there, I've sat in the chair. You're doing so many different things at once, and you have so many different hats and tasks. It's sometimes difficult to say, oh, well, I spent exactly this many minutes on this invoice, or this is how much it took to do this. And there's so many different things that factor into it. So it can be hard at first to really identify what those costs are. But yeah, again, that's where we can help and kind of come in and look at what your current process is and figure out how we can save you money, and also how we can make you money. That's kind of the big thing that we've heard, is we can not only help cover the cost of bringing on a solution like Corpay, but we can actually make you money in the end.
Dan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I'm really, really excited about what Corpay bring, because Maggie's right. In our world, for years, what we've been doing is working with practitioners, the department leaders, and saying, okay, what do you want to maintain? What's going well? Is there a value to that? What do you want to avoid, or what do you want to achieve in the future? How will this benefit the supplier? Can we put a value to that? Often we're talking about soft benefits, or maybe not avoiding some hiring or avoiding some training costs. My advice to anybody listening in would be, okay, still ask those questions. And if you can't get try and say, what's the dollar value? What's that worth? And what's that worth over time? And you have to push yourself a little bit and ask others to try and come up with, well, if you had to guess, what would that value be? So that's still worth doing. Or what's the scale of this to the value of this to the organization on a level of 1 to 5? But when you add in Corpay and using the MasterCard rails, I've seen projects that are paid for within 6 to 8 months. And after that, and let's be honest, folks, when they deploy technology, typically they're not ripping it out every 3 years. It's often in there 3 years, 6 years, 8 years, in our world, 10 years. This is suddenly the ROI is paying not just for the accounts payable department, but I've seen it pay for the entire finance department. So where people used to say maybe one day we'll get to the point where finance becomes a revenue generator, I think Maggie was hinting at that. That's become a reality, and so that's really exciting. And I think, not just from a software vendor point of view, but for the folks deploying this technology, you do that, and that's pretty interesting. Good, a good point in your career, I think.
Matthew, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I would say, all of those points are great, and just looking at the value of bringing in, the network effect of, like I said, knowing the buyer and the supplier, and having the issuers and the technology providers all in the same place, that is really driving those business processes that are going to bring operational efficiency to really, keep the business continuity going, right? So I think we saw it within the beginning of the pandemic. How do we make sure there's not a disruption in the flow of business, and the value that the organizations are bringing to the financial transactions and the operational efficiencies? That is value, I think, that's being seen now.
Okay, well, going down my list of what we asked the people who joined us, I think we've had a little look at cost and the benefits in cost there might be, and fraud prevention. Ease of use was very important to them. Anything to say about that? Just you guys will just make it really easy, or can we say anything more than that? Maggie.
From my perspective, I think if we're simply talking about AP automation, it should not add, ideally, it should not add a ton of workload. It should also not add a ton of complexity. So obviously you want to look for a company that offers training, and you want to be able to know what you're doing and know the software you're using. But for Corpay specifically, our software is incredibly easy. There's not a ton of what I call buttons in our software. We run basically on APIs, we run on the back end. So you want to have something, it should not feel like you're bringing in a new ERP system or you're bringing on an entire new CRM tool. It should just feel like it's running in the background and saving you time. So for ease of use, you want to look for something that's not going to add a ton of complexity to your workload. So really looking for a solution that maybe it's not necessarily looking for all the bells and whistles under the sun. You want something that's going to make your life easier, not more complicated.
And presumably that goes with scalability as well, that you can start out somewhere and scale things if you need to. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of clients that will bring us on for one section of their business that we love to hear, oh, we're going to do a trial with this. And then next thing we know, they're bringing on all of their sections of business because they're like, this is great. Why would we not do this? But you want to have that also if you're growing. So I think it's great to start at whatever stage you're at and bring in some type of automation. And then but find a partner that can grow as you grow. So something that's not going to be super complicated. If you add an entity or add a business, you want to be able to bring that in without a ton of lift. So definitely looking for a partner that can do that.
Dan?
Yeah, this is a great point. I think one, I encourage folks to involve their users when you are making selections, because you want folks that will adopt it and use it, not begrudgingly. So get your users involved and let them see the technologies. I think you should also, a good practice is ask the vendor, okay, what happens after deployment? I was once at a trade show, 3 days in, and a lady comes up, and I was chatting with her, and I said, oh, we've caught your eye. And she said, yeah, this is great, but what nobody's talking about is what happens 3 or 5 months after the technology is deployed. This is my career at stake. I've got the day job, and how do we make sure this is really going to go well? So I think when you involve your users, they need to be excited by the technology, and you also want to chat with folks and make sure, okay, these folks aren't just trying to make a sale. They generally care about the outcomes, and there's a plan for them to come back in and fine tune and look at AI results and say, okay, how's it going? Can we make improvements here over and above what you currently have? That's key.
Matthew, perhaps from your perspective, you can give us some idea of the scale, the scalability, and what people can make digitization, automation actually do, because you must have some experience.
That's where I look at the work that we do in the industry with partners such as Corpay, right? So if you look at the maturity and the size of the MasterCard network today, a network that was in market over 50 years ago that everybody uses in their day-to-day lives. How do we look at that network today that has the transaction capabilities, the approval technology, data, as well as secure and safe environment for fraud? So if you look at those together, taking that mature network, combining it with new technologies like Corpay, that is where I think that scalability and that value is important to bring up.
And Maggie, I think you wanted to come in, did you? See your hand. Okay,
I was just checking the chat to make sure we didn't have any questions.
Okay, sorry. I think there's a little hand there, but thank you for the scalability. Now we've given people an idea of what's out there, what's been going on. Let's really run through the benefits, the absolute benefits that people might not have thought about. They might have done what they had to do during the pandemic. They might be prepared to sort of sit there and say, okay, well, we've managed our teams, we've given our teams what they need to just about survive. But what shall we do now? What are the benefits that you see for the next period? Perhaps we could start with Dan.
One of the anecdotes I see when folks do this right, and I said involve your users, the folks in your departments, is I've had finance leaders turn around and say, an unexpected outcome of this, there was a little bit of hesitancy at first, was twofold. One, we have more time to train folks and therefore even talk about career progression, and we keep these folks within our business. Many general managers don't mind seeing folks move around the business, they just do not want to lose them. And then the second is, this type of play, whether it be payables automation and virtual payments, often is used as a trump card to the organization. I've seen it where folks have deployed this technology and said, and then PMO, IT, or order to cash get involved and say, we can do digital transformation here. That's not just for those folks working with IBM, for example. I don't mean no discredit to IBM, but what I'm saying is it's often used as a vehicle to say, hey, we can do this and we can do more. So that's one of the side benefits I see.
Maggie?
So one of the side benefits I've seen that I really didn't foresee was hiring. So I heard the feedback that once they brought in a partner like Esker or Corpay, they were able to, because everything was automated and was remote, they were actually able to expand their hiring pool. And now they're able to look outside of their city, outside of the area, and actually hire talent from all over the country. So that really opens up options. It also opens up options to people who maybe were looking to leave because they wanted to move. So that was a lot of issue is we saw a lot of people moving out of cities this year and wanting to live somewhere smaller or move back to their hometown, but there wasn't a lot of job options there. But now those companies don't have to lose those talented people just because they're moving away. So I think that was kind of a benefit that I saw that was really cool and really interesting to see that I didn't foresee when we started this whole process.
One of the things I'd like to ask you all to consider and give your views on is it's a double thing, really. That one of the things people wanted to be certain of, that systems would be compliant, that they would be good for compliance, but also one of the benefits that I've been reading that people, once they put things in place, are the not only the improved payments, but performance data, keeping data, and how do you see that? Matthew, perhaps we could kick off there with you, maybe?
Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the main benefits. If you look at a card network, is now there is an exponential increase in card not present transactions, right? So being able to keep that data secure, being able to give organizations access to it, and then the ability to look at that, report on it, make decisions on that data. So data has always been key. In this environment, it really came to the top. So I think that really multiplied the value of the centralized platforms. I think which Maggie highlighted there is those centralized platforms were, one, easy to distribute, easy to train on, and easy to access in a remote workforce environment. So I think those things coupled together really beneficial. I think the final thing is really the flexibility, the clarity of what the objective of the data is. How do you communicate that message, and then how do you support it from a customer's perspective? I think those things together really supported through this pandemic.
Who else would like to come in on that?
I'd comment because I would like to comment on Maggie's point as well.
Okay.
An anecdotal story. So first on data, what we see is folks really value the idea of, okay, here's what our process was before, here's PO invoice volume versus non-PO, or here's where our exceptions are, and we're making progress on improving them. Here's the reasons why invoices cannot flow automatically, and we can help the organization figure out how to improve that with their supplier or internal processes, et cetera, and helping that company benchmark against their peers in the industry or peers using our technology. I think what Maggie was saying is that this digital transformation can help with hiring. The story one of my favorite stories is I was talking to a $1 billion organization up there in Pacific Northwest, and they said, we're going to move to downtown Seattle. I said, oh, that sounds like expensive. They said, yeah, we're going to set up a whole new headquarters and we're going to transform our technology. And they said, look, we're going to look to compete with SpaceX. Oh, wow. And they said, look, and what that means is if we put people come in here, we ask people to come in, especially the younger generation, to come in and do this work, and the user interface isn't nice, and we have broken and non-automated processes. There's no way in heck we're going to be able to compete with SpaceX. So the reality is having technology in is actually really important, because you don't just, not only do we need to hire these folks, we need to keep them. And if they're having to learn multiple ERPs and the process is complicated and it feels like they're doing work, 10, 20 years from 10 or 20 years ago, they're not going to stay. And so again, that's going to be a lot of money spent, and we're not going to achieve what we're trying to go after. So I think Maggie's got a point there, and that that we see that's not the only example, but that's one of the most interesting examples I've seen.
Thanks a lot, Dan. And Maggie, do you have anything that you want to add about the compliance data issue?
I think Dan and Matt hit it right on the head, so I have nothing to add.
Okay, well, I'm giving everybody a 5-minute warning. We're coming towards the end. So if anybody has a question out there, please put it up. If not, I'm going to ask our 3 panelists to say the one thing that they see coming around the corner that the rest of us might not have seen, or if there's anything that you think we haven't touched on that you'd like to take the last few minutes to speak about. Matt, perhaps I could come to you first.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing we touched on, and I think it's very important, is if you look at a centralized platform, financial payments, that data is going to drive insight. That data is also going to drive security of knowing where those payments are and where they're going. So I think if you look at financial transactions and fraud, it's bringing value to be able to monitor those transactions. And I think we talked about virtual card a little bit at the beginning. That's truly a tokenized transaction. So you're going to see a very secure transaction as that goes through. So I think as we look at those, through this, is we're seeing the value of the tools and what it means to secure transactions. And we're going to see that more and more coming throughout this evolution.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Dan.
I have a CIO in the Northeast who uses the term fungibility. The first time he sent me an email and described how Esker was helping his organization be more fungible, I had to ask him, what does that mean? I thought I spoke English, with some reasonable success. And he said, well, what I'm getting at there, Dan, is he said, we are a growing organization. We do have multiple ERPs. We have shared services around the world. And he says, when we bring in technologies, if that allows us to not necessarily hire folks who have to specifically know each ERP, it becomes easier to bring people on and to have a shared service as opposed to having all these regional services around the world. So Maggie talked about how I think certainly Corpay bring value, and Esker plays in this space too, which is, can we make the technology easier to use? Can the technology communicate? Doesn't have to sit inside every single ERP, but can it communicate and give that the CFO, he or she, the visibility they need to grow their organization without necessarily having to hire as many people with specific experience to each ERP. I think there's value in that, and that's a trend also. So fungibility.
Thanks very much, Dan. Taught us in a couple of directions there. Matt, anything from you?
I agree with that. I think we're going to see more and more companies wanting to communicate directly with these ERPs, either building out API integrations, preferred partnerships. So I think that's going to be something we really see. And that's something we're focusing on internally as a big push for us, is trying to figure out how to directly communicate and make that as seamless as possible, even if we don't sit right inside their ERP, but how can we work with as many different solutions, ERP systems, accounting systems that we can. The other thing that I think we're really seeing is an expansion of global offerings. So I think the world has been moving in a global direction for many years now, but I think that's only going to keep happening and keep happening at a more and more alarming rate. So I think it's good to look for partners that are putting money and resources into their global offerings and making that really a priority as well.
Thanks very much indeed, Maggie. Well, unless anybody has anything that they're dying to put in the last few seconds of this, I would just say many thanks to our panel, Matthew Mellon from MasterCard, Dan Reeve from Esker, and Maggie Schroeder from Corpay. And this webinar will be available on demand on the IFOL website from tomorrow. So please feel free to share it with any colleagues or friends you think may benefit from watching. It's been a really interesting 45 minutes. Thank you very much, guys. And thanks to you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Cheers.